President. I have also come to the floor today to speak about the proposal to raise taxes on the 5 largest domestic energy producers. And I think it's important that we remember that we are speaking about 5 energy producers, 5 oil companies. We're not talking about a tax proposal that is broad and wide and encompassing. We're talking about a proposal to raise taxes on the 5 largest domestic energy producers. And I have to admit that I had some hesitation about even engaging in this floor debate at all, because I think we recognize that the words and the statements that we're delivering here are just that. They're just talk, they're just words. This proposal is designed to fail, but in failing, it is designed to score some political points, and it seems like that's where we are today. But as a senator who represents a state like Alaska, a oil and gas producing state, a state that would clearly be hurt by this proposal, I am obligated to outline why I feel that this is so deeply flawed. So I want to start by really stating the obvious here. This legislation will not reduce energy prices, but if anything, it will increase our energy prices. It will not substantially reduce our deficit or our debt, but if anything, it will add to those burdens by shutting off production and forcing the government to forego production revenues. And I think it's important that we put this in context, because people around the country, as they're looking at the price at the pump go up day after day, they're saying, what are you doing in Congress to lower the prices? What are you doing to deal with the higher price of gasoline in this country? And I think it's important that we recognize that this legislation that we have in front of us does nothing to reduce our energy prices. And it's not just me that says that. The chairman of the Finance Committee has indicated that. We've heard several members on both Republican side of the aisle, Democrat side of the aisle, say this is not going to reduce our prices. So what exactly is it that we are seeking to do with this, other than send a message? This proposal, I think it's important to recognize, will hurt poor and working families across our country. We all know what the price of gas is in our respective states. I will remind my colleagues that as much as Alaska benefits from high prices of oil as we are a producer, it is a fact that it kills us as in our local communities, in our economies, because we are the state with the highest gas prices across the country right now. There was a news story just last week back home in Kotzebue, which is the northwest region up in the state. They're paying $7.55 in Norvik, $8.25 in Kobuk, $8.95 in Ambler. I was in Fort Yukon a couple weeks ago. There they are at a $5, $6, $7 gas figure, but the spring barge, which will be coming in about 4 or 5 weeks now, will be delivering fuel at prices that were set some weeks ago, and people have been alerted that on the day that the barge delivers the fuel, the price will go up at the pump $1 additional. We're not talking cents here, we're talking an additional $1 to the people in Fort Yukon. So we know very well what high prices mean to us, and our constituents are asking us to do something about it. What can you do to lower those prices? To develop a coherent energy policy that starts to work now and then yields progress over time. Our constituents are not asking us to make this problem worse, and yet that is precisely what these proposed tax increases will do. Now, I heard my colleague here say that, no, this is not designed to increase the prices that are out there. Well, it might not be designed to do that. But that's what we can expect if, in fact, these tax increases do go into play. Now, it's been a few years since I got my degree in economics, but even though it was more than a few years ago, I do remember some of these very early entry-level classes that I took, and I remember learning that raising taxes on something is going to tend to make it more expensive. And I remember learning that when you tax something, you tend to wind up with less of it. That's just basic economics. And I think that there's at least some understanding of these concepts around here, because I don't see anyone that is proposing to raise taxes on solar panels or raise taxes on wind turbines to bring down their costs. The reality, Mr. President, is that this proposal, and I believe the point is conceded even by its supporters, this proposal will not cause gasoline prices to drop. Instead, it could very well cause them to rise. And I understand the memo from the Congressional Research Service suggests that no significant impact on prices will be seen in the short run. But that is the key phrase here, in the short run. Because what we need to be doing is looking longer term than next week or next month. Whenever corporations face increased costs, they've got a responsibility to their investors to recover those costs wherever possible. And usually what happens is they pass them on to the consumers. And to the extent the costs of this proposal cannot be passed on, these companies will simply have less to invest in new projects. Now, that's kind of talking about what happens or what doesn't happen with the price of gas. But this proposal is also not about reducing the debt either, and I think it's important to put that in context here. At best, it may be a drop in the bucket. According to the CBO, the President's budget for fiscal years 2012 through 2021 would result in nearly $9.5 trillion in new debt. This proposal, assuming that it has no negative economic impact, would raise $21 billion, or about 0.2% of that debt. We'd still need something like 450 times more revenue just to break even, never mind the $14 trillion debt that we've already incurred. We all know that we hit that debt ceiling yesterday, so it really does cause you to wonder, is this the best that we can do when we're talking about balancing the federal budget? Now, I understand that this proposal is not all that it will take, and no one is proposing that it do so. But I think it is important that we be honest with the American people when we talk about what this would mean in terms of a reduction to the deficit. And if we're being honest with each other, we're going to see this proposal for what it is. Essentially, a yes vote tonight to raise taxes on oil and gas companies is simply a vote to try and take a pound of flesh from these 5 major companies that, yes, in fact, are making money. Yes, in fact, are making a profit. A no vote on this proposal tonight is a vote to try to keep our prices under control, and it's a vote to help preserve America's competitiveness within the global economy. Now, I also want to take just a moment here to kind of set the record straight on subsidies. There are no payments from the federal government to the major energy producers, as some have implied. Past Congresses have decided that those companies, and most other companies in America, I might add, deserve certain tax reductions. And this is a critical distinction here, because we haven't decided that the federal government should actually give more to these companies. What we've decided is that the federal government should take less from them. Now, if that's the same as a subsidy, then new homeowners are direct recipients of subsidies because we deduct mortgage interest payments. And that means that almost every company in our country, whether it's a Hollywood studio or the New York Times, whoever it is, that almost every company then is somehow or other subsidized. Now, if we're talking about leveling the playing field by eliminating all of the incentives within our tax code, especially in the context of broader reform that makes our tax code simpler and more fair, I welcome that discussion, and I think many in this chamber do. It would be a much different conversation if we were considering a reduction in the corporate tax rate. But instead, we're here debating whether or not to give different tax treatment to essentially punish a handful of companies in just one sector of our economy. And really, there's no policy justification for it other than that they can afford it. They're making money. They can afford it. So I would ask my colleagues, is this the kind of business climate that we want for the United States? And I really have to wonder then, if the answer to that is yes, who the next target will be if making large profits signals to Congress that you should be taxed at a higher rate. In reality, domestic energy producers are already amongst the most heavily taxed companies here in this country. While the effective tax rates for all corporations averaged 26.5% last year, the oil and gas industry's tax rate was at a much higher 41%. Instead of being subsidized by the federal government, the industry is actually a very large taxpayer. The federal government taxes gasoline at a rate of 18.4 cents a gallon. It also receives billions of dollars each year in non-tax revenues from the industry. Producers must pay the government for the rights of each of their leases. They've got to pay the annual rents. To hang on to those leases, they pay the royalties on any production that ultimately results from them. So in terms of what is paid out, according to one estimate, the oil and gas industry's total payments to the government amounted to $86 million per day in 2010. Now, I would also remind my colleagues that the President has established a goal of cutting oil imports by 3 million barrels a day by 2025. If we intend to achieve that goal, which is a good goal, raising taxes on domestic oil production just defies the logic here. To reduce imports, we will need to increase our domestic production. And that won't happen if we impose a hostile tax environment for the companies that operate here, companies that are already challenged to produce the oil and gas resources that we know we have, but we haven't been allowed to explore. Now, before I conclude, Mr. President, I want to mention an article that recently appeared in the Financial Times. It noted that in 2011, this year, OPEC nations stand to take in more than $1 trillion from exporting oil. Our nation, the United States, will provide a pretty good share of that money, likely tens of billions of dollars. And what do we hear about it? Nothing from the people who are proposing these tax increases. Nothing about the tremendous sums of money that we send overseas each year for foreign oil. Just the far smaller sums that could be collected from domestic companies through higher taxes. That's missing the forest here, Mr. President, to cut down the one tree that just happens to be growing in our line of sight. So here we are. Instead of doing everything that we can to halt the hemorrhage of American dollars to foreign countries, the Senate is now focused on an effort to raise taxes on 5 companies who actually operate here. The day after we hit the debt ceiling, we're debating a measure that would hardly make a dent in our debt. We're on pace to spend trillions of dollars outside of our economy in the years ahead, and we're on pace to incur trillions in federal debt. But so long as a few companies pay higher taxes somehow or other, it makes us all feel better. No wonder the American people have lost so much faith in the legislative process here. No wonder so much blame for high energy prices is placed on the federal government. The proposal before us today is not an answer for high gas prices or the federal debt. It is more likely to raise our energy prices, reduce our nation's oil production, and deepen our annual deficits. I had hoped that we would have a substantive, a reasoned debate, discussion about how we're going to solve all these problems, but instead we're left to debate a measure that is all but certain to fail. I think that the Senate can do better than that. We will have debate tomorrow about the Republican alternative, a bill that, while it's not perfect, will increase production, generate revenues for the government, create new jobs, improve the safety of our offshore operations. If we're looking for good policy, Mr. President, I think that's where we need to start. We've got a long ways to go, but what we have before us today, I think, is unfortunate. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.